Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. You are in for an awesome treat today. Get ready for it. Not only for the guests that I'm bringing your way, you're going to love them, but also for this unusual way we start today's episode. In a minute, I'm just going to hit play from the moment our guest joined us. And it's going to give you a behind the scenes view into how these episodes sometimes begin. So get ready for that. But before that, let me give a little bit of a formal introduction. Damon West is our guest. He went from a Division I starting quarterback to becoming the Uptown Burglar and being sentenced to 65 years in prison. He's today a keynote speaker. He's the best-selling author of The Coffee Bean, and Damon is a testament to resilience, to redemption, and to the power of personal change. Damon joins us to share the pivotal lessons learned from his darkest days, how he found hope and purpose in Texas supermax prison, and how he ultimately rebuilt his life one choice, one decision, one day at a time. You are also going to learn about the inmate who showed him how to be a change agent. It's a great story. The freedom he discovered in surrendering control and the essential role his faith, his service, and his community played in his recovery. My friends, if you need a reminder that change is always possible, this conversation is for you. You're going to leave with practical tools to overcome adversity, shift your perspective, and take ownership over your life. Damon's story will move you, it will challenge you, and it will leave you feeling like you, yes, I'm talking to you, can become a coffee bean in life's boiling water. More on that in a moment. So here we go. I'm going to just let you into the behind the scenes conversation that I had with Damon West before the conversation fully began. Here we go. Hey,
Good
man,
deal,
how
man.
are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Almost anything I would say to you right now will seem like you've heard it before. So I guess I'll just say I do this a lot. And the story that you have to share is so life affirming. Here's what I'll say, dude. On the way into to work, I saw a lady who I haven't seen in a while, and I just went over to say hi to her, and she started crying. Long story made very short. She's in a very unfortunate relationship. It's destructive. And I was able to share with her where I'm going today at 4 o'clock and this guy that I know and the story that he had, because she said it's too late for me to start over. And Damon, like, you're proof, dude. It's not. It's not.
Right.
And we all have stories like that, but yours just boom. It's impossible not to be moved. Impossible. So I've heard them all, man, and I'm easily moved because I'm like jello. I love it. It turns me
Yeah.
on. But when I see a woman who is done, returned to possibility in her life because of your story, I realize this work you're about to do today is important.
This woman you're talking about, there's a story she needs to hear, and it's this. When I first got to prison, it was a baptism by fire. Like I was a fish out of water, John, and ever since the war, I'd never been in this environment before, right? Right, white middle class guy, college quarterback, all this stuff. Now I'm in the pits of hell. And I've got this guide, though. God sends these messengers to you all the time. But the trick is you got to be receptive to all of God's messengers to get all of his messages. So I'm a very receptive person the first couple of months in prison. I'm still am to this day. So this messenger of mine is a guy named Carlos. Carlos is not his real name, obviously, but he's my first cellmate in prison. This guy teaches me all about prison. So we're walking the cell block one day, and I see a guy laying in his bunk. He's reading a book. And next to him on this bunk is a mouse, his pet mouse, just laying there next to him. It's not tethered up to anything. It's not kept in any kind of a jar or anything. It's just free to go, but it doesn't go. It sits right next to this guy, sleeping. It's actually still like a little pet, little dog. So I elbow Carlos. I'm like, hey, man, what's up with that? So Carlos is like, come to the cell with me. So we go to the cell. First thing he does is he rips me up and down. He's like, never looking at another man's cell. That's window shopping. And if you ever get caught looking at another man's cell, you can get into a fight because obviously you don't have a real good reason to look at another person's cell. But he said, what I want you to listen to me now is to stay away from the men that have the mice. All the inmates that have mice, stay away from them. I'm like, well, why? Do they have lice or something? Are they dirty? He said, no, it's the way they get the mice to obey them that you have to avoid them because they do the same thing to people too. So first of all, to have a pet mouse, you got to catch a mouse. Easy to catch a mouse in prison, John. They're everywhere, man. Prison's dirty. The lights go out in prison. Mice and roaches come out. Boom, they're everywhere. Catching a mouse is simple. You put a little, a little bit of peanut butter in the back of an empty potato chip bag, sit it under your bunk at night. And when the mouse goes in to get the peanut butter, you hear him crinkling the bag, and you can close the top of the bag, and you got him in there. There's guys that catch mice all the time. They let them go on the field in the rec yard, right? Well, these guys that want the mouse to be their pet, they don't let the mouse go. They take the mouse in the bag, walk it over the few steps to the toilet, because you got to imagine you're in a prison cell, a little 10 by 12 cell. You got a bunk bed, metal desk, metal toilet. He'll take the mouse out of the peanut butter, the potato chip bag, and he'll throw him in the toilet bowl and drown the mouse. It's a metal toilet. This mouse can't get out of a metal toilet. Those little claws don't get any purchase on metal. And he'll watch the mouse as it's struggling to live. And finally, when the mouse gives up and lets go to die, the inmate will reach in and save the mouse. I've got saved in air quotes in case this is not a video. So he'll reach in and he'll save the mouse, pulls the mouse out, pets on it, blows on it, loves it, dries it off, talks to it. I love you so much. I'm the only one that loves you. I'll always protect you. I've got you in this life. There's no one but me. I love you. Puts the mouse aside, lets it sleep, lets it rest, gives it food. Then the next day he takes the mouse out and he drowns it and saves it again. The next day he drowns it and saves it again. Saves it, drowns it, saves it over and over again, until finally the mouse stops seeing the guy that throws him in as a tormentor, and he sees the guy as his savior. The mouse will never leave that guy's side. There's no reason to put the mouse into a cage, because life becomes the mouse's cage. That's how they get pet mice in prison. Your friend's the mouse. So anyway, very interesting story.
Man, I'm blown away. I wasn't expecting that. And so, my friends, I welcome you to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. And I got my buddy Damon with me. We're going to hear his story today. But what you just heard from our brother is the kind of stuff we hear before we hit record. And almost always on these podcasts, you hear me begin with the introduction. Man, I wish you were listening when. I wish you had heard this guy's heart, because you're going to love him or her. And what you just heard is what I have exposure to all the time. And now we have exposure to, because Damon's generous enough to share part of his life story with the rest of us. We all from time to time are that mouse. We all from time to time find ourselves in that jail cell, in that toilet, swimming for life. And that person sometimes we lean into as a savior isn't. But we're going to talk today about what is, and our agency to move forward. This is going to be an important episode with an important individual who is too humble to recognize it himself. And that's why I love him. That's why I'm excited for this time. And that's why I welcome you, my friends, to my brother, my friend, and the one who just shared that story, my brother, Damon West. Damon, welcome to Live Inspired.
John, I'm so excited to be here. And this is a total God thing that we're even having this thing. I mean, this is literally, I'm sitting in the plane next to a person that is connected to you. And we talk. She has a concern about looking out the window while she's flying. And I'm sitting in the window seat. She's like, hey, do you mind if we keep the window open just till after we take off? And then the sun's blaring in. You know how it is on the plane. You're like, the last thing you want to do is get this window open. But this little old sweet lady is like, will you please hold the window open for me? I'm like, absolutely. So we do it, close the window. She starts talking to me, and she tells me about you. And she's talking about you. And I'm like, I know who John is. I mean, I've seen him at Milet. He runs the same circles with John Gordon. All these people I know that we know each other. And she said, well, I know him and I'm connecting to you. And so that's how we're here today, brother. Nothing happens in life by accident. So thanks for having me today, brother.
So normally I do a long-winded introduction, and today I'm not. I'm going to let you introduce yourself. If you and I were to bump into each other on that flight, and I'm the one that says we're keeping the window open, my name's John. If you were to respond to that and I asked you, man, what do you do? Tell me about you. How do you respond to that on that middle seat on that flight from Dallas to wherever you're going next?
So what I would say is, John, I'm a vessel of hope. And that's what I am, man. I'm just a vessel. I've been given this incredible story about this overcoming adversity. It's the greatest odds possible, living life inside of a Texas supermax prison, being sentenced to life in prison, and transforming myself into the best version of me, and showing other people that you are capable of way more than you think you are, that adversity, it's never as bad as you think it's going to be, and you're always capable of way more than you think you are. And that my life is a vessel for that, because it's really what I am, John. I'm just a vessel. And I know this for a fact, because we'll bounce around in this conversation, but I got sentenced to life in prison in Texas. And the year was 2008 when the Dallas SWAT team took me down in a dramatic SWAT team raid in Dallas. I was the ringleader of a bunch of other meth addicts breaking into people's homes all over Dallas. And we were bad people, John. We didn't ever physically hurt anybody. But these burglaries went on for about 3 years. And look, when I broke into people's houses, I didn't just steal their property. I stole their sense of security, man. I stole something from my victims they can never get back. But on July 30th, 2008, a Dallas SWAT team came into this dirty old apartment that I was in, and they pulled me out of there, and they brought justice to me. And I tell people all the time, looking back on it, they didn't just arrest me that day. They rescued me that day. They rescued me. These guys saved these men and women, these Dallas SWAT team. They're armed. They got helmets on. They got rifles in their hands. They're screaming, "Don't move, don't move!" And they pulled me out of that dope house that day. Roughly a year later, I go to trial, and the jury sentenced me to life in prison after a week-long trial for organized crime. It's a RICO case, and I'm the boss of the whole thing. And right after the trial was over, my mom has this conversation with my mom and dad were talking to me behind the glass. And my mom's giving me this ultimatum, John. You can't come back as someone we don't recognize. You got to get on God's back, let Christ carry you through this thing, making footprints in the sand. But she tells me, do not come back. Don't get in one of these Aryan Brotherhood type gangs, and don't get any tattoos while you're in there. No gangs, no tattoos. Come back as the man we raised, or don't come back at all. And John, if I was sitting next to you on a plane, this is about the time where I would stop and I would say, now, do you think I knew how I was going to keep that promise to my mom? I had no idea, John. I've never been to prison before. I didn't know anybody had been to prison before. I was 32 years old when I got arrested, 33 when I get sentenced to life in prison. And all I can see in front of me is this dark tunnel of time, and it's going to devour me. I'm going to this machine with teeth, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. But like we said in the intro, God is going to send messengers to you. And these messengers, they don't always look like you. They don't come from the same background as you. They don't have the same experience as you. And they're going to look different from you. The first messenger I see on the road is this black Muslim man named Muhammad. He's in Dallas County Jail with me. He's a career criminal. He's been out of prison his entire life. But Muhammad comes up to me in this county jail, and he's telling me what prison's going to be like. And that's what he tells me. Imagine prison is like a pot of boiling water. You get three choices how to respond to the boiling water. You can be like a carrot that turns soft in the boiling water, an egg that becomes hardened by the boiling water, or a coffee bean which changes the pot of boiling water into a pot of coffee. He said the coffee bean is the only thing that changes the water because the coffee bean is the change agent. And he said that's what you're going to have to become. You're going to have to become the change agent, change the water around you if you want to come back as someone your parents recognize. But he's explaining to me, though, John, he's not just hanging out there like that. He's saying, look, it's all about energy, man. You create the energy around you that you want to be around you. If you walk around with a mean, negative look on your face and a scowl all the time, you're going to attract negative people. But if you walk around with a smile on your face, you'll attract the positive people. You'll attract other coffee beans to you. And the last words he ever says to me when he leaves Dallas County Jail in the summer of 2009, he says, hey, West, be a coffee bean. Be a coffee bean, John. The 4 words that changed my entire life, because those 4 words put the power back inside me. And that's what my job, my mission is in life. I'm a keynote speaker. I travel the world sharing the story and the message of the coffee bean. You're a great storyteller, John. You're a keynote speaker. You're a great storyteller. You go all over the place. You know that people love stories. I think it's the oldest form of education. It's the oldest form of entertainment, right? I mean, in the beginning, for millennia, we huddled around tents and campfires. Then we got around villages and churches and communities, and then it's houses and then it's apartments. But people, human beings, have always gathered around at the feet of storytellers. Storytellers, it's our job, and I say our because you're a storyteller too. It's our job to elicit emotion out of the audience, because emotion, once we get emotion out of somebody, then we can create a core memory, right? Because once a memory is involved, people will remember how you made them feel. It's like that Maya Angelou quote, people don't always remember what you say. They don't always remember what you do, but they will always remember how you make them feel. And it's my job as a storyteller and a keynote speaker to make sure I make people feel something from that story. And the thing I'd like for them to feel is that no matter how bad the situation may seem, no matter how desperate it may be in life, no matter how dark the situation looks, there's always going to be an opportunity in that adversity somewhere. The opportunity in adversity, brother.
So I've spoken twice today already, and in one of the groups, it was a smaller group, but before I spoke, there was a kind of a breakout speaker who had everybody take an orange. And they had to remember the orange by the scars, the dimples, the brokenness of the orange. Okay, this kind of almost like a coffee bean analogy in some regards. But then they had to present their orange to everybody else by telling the stories of how they got those wounds. And then everybody put their oranges back into a pit. Okay. So it's all one big old bag of oranges again. And then they had to find their orange, and everybody was able to find their orange because they knew their story. And I want people today to not only hear your story, but to recognize their story, the power of their story, the power of their brokenness, the power of those dimples once redeemed. When we start talking just about the coffee bean or the 65 years you're about to spend in Texas prison, people don't even know what led up to that. And I think part of your story, the part that is so broken and the part that makes it so beautiful, is what you went through as a kid, who people thought you were, what you were actually going through, and some of the mistakes you made along the way. So I'm going to back up a little bit. You got some heroes in your story.
Yeah.
You know, I've got heroes in mine. One of the mighty heroes in your story is your dad.
Yeah.
And just the way he was, the way he raised you, the way he treated you and talked with you. So talk for a moment about your dad. What was he like as a little boy growing up?
Yeah, and you're in Missouri, man. So my dad is from Missouri. He's from a little town called Centralia, Missouri, which is about 20 miles north of Columbia.
I know it well.
Huge Cardinals fan, man. He actually grew up going to Cardinals games and the Browns games back when the St. Louis Browns were there. My dad's got a lot of great stories growing up in St. Louis, man. It's funny you talk about my dad and you talk about the story about the oranges. My dad told me one time, he said, Damon, if we could all throw our problems onto a pile and then we could go up to that pile and we could pick someone else's problem up, once you see what everybody's dealing with in their life, you'd probably grab your problem and throw it back over your shoulder too. You'd be grateful for what your problems are in life. So it reminded me of that thing about that orange, right? You're throwing everybody's throwing their orange through a pile. My dad was a smart guy. He died last year of stage 4 colon cancer. But man, listen, I got this guy for 48 years of my life. And for 48 years, I had one of the best instructors ever. From a very young age, my dad, he was a sports writer. He came down from Missouri to Texas to go to school at Lamar University in Beaumont to play golf there. And he got thrusted into the civil rights movement. 1971, he's in his mid-20s. He's living in Port Arthur, Texas, which is down in southeast Texas. The best running back in America is in Port Arthur, best high school running back in America. But at the time in Port Arthur, black athletes can't go on the front page of a sports page. This is 1971 in the South. But my dad's this young sports writer from Missouri. He didn't grow up in the South. In fact, he really couldn't understand why people were so hung up on race because he grew up in Missouri. The opportunity came up for Joe Washington Jr., that great running back, to get on the front page of his senior year. And my dad jumped out there and did it. And once he did that, man, he drew a line in the sand and people were breaking his windows. They were slitting his tires. They sent him a bunch of hate mail. My father saved all that hate mail. And whenever I was a little boy growing up in the 80s, this is 10 years later, I'm growing up in the 80s. My dad comes down to the attic one day with that box of hate mail, all these little letters. And he makes me read all these letters, John, every nasty negative word that people say about my father and my mother. And my dad tells me, he said, Damon, I want you to read these letters because I want you to see what it looks like to take a stand and do the right thing. Because he said, sometimes, Damon, in life, taking a stand and doing the right thing, it means you're going to stand alone. But he said, it's always okay to stand alone as long as you're standing on the right side of history. Now, 25 years later, when this little boy is a man sitting in the county jail cell waiting for the prison bus, this is going to be the principle I'm about to rebuild my entire life on. In fact, I hear echoes of my father when I'm talking to Muhammad in Dallas County Jail, because Muhammad's saying the same thing. He's telling me you got to stand alone. You can't get in one of these gangs. You promised your parents you wouldn't. But back to my dad, man. Great guy. When I was 9 years old, I was molested by a babysitter. It's a female babysitter. And look, I'm always real careful to say, John, in this situation, it wasn't one of those molestation deals that were just tore my life apart, because there's people that are seriously sexually assaulted that it destroys them and everything they're about. They're being, even their identity. That's not what happened to 9-year-old Damon West. I always liken it to this. Like, so imagine there's this big door that you see when you're a kid, but you're a kid. You can't go on the other side of that door. That's the adult door. And it's got chains on it. It's got locks on it. You can't even reach the handle. It's so high. But if an adult went one day and opened that big door for you and unlocked it for you as a 9-year-old, and you get on the other side of it, well, the other side of the adult doors is just a bunch of doors that are wide open, because adults can go through any door they want. They have the power of choice, responsibility. At 9 years old, I was introduced to a lot of adult behaviors through this babysitter, and I got on the other side of that door. And there's other doors that are open. There's drinking, there's smoking pot. sex. There's a lot of different things that get into at a very young age. So I always tell people that at a very young age, I was introduced to a lot of adult behaviors, and I liked the adult behaviors. I liked the way I felt when I put alcohol in for the first time when I was 10. I liked the way it felt when I smoked pot for the first time when I was 12. I got into this thing where I started abusing substances at a very young age, and I had no idea I was feeding this disease of addiction that eventually was going to end up with me smoking meth and becoming the leader of a crime ring to steal for meth. But again, a lot of things happen in your young age of life.
But people hear the story and it sounds like your family, your community was a train wreck. I mean, we've read that story before, nothing new under the sun there. And yet nothing could be farther from the truth. Your parents were idyllic parents. They loved each other. They raised their kids well. They raised you in the church appropriately. They raised you with strong values. And in spite of all of that, this experience happens. And I've heard you both live and also on podcasts, and I just know your heart, man. It seems sometimes like you almost diminish the effect of that abuse at age 9. Talk about that, because it's the explosion from which everything else is released.
Absolutely. No, and I can and the reason I think that what you're sensing is true, John, but the reason I think that I downplayed a lot is because I made a lot of poor choices in life, and I created a lot of victims with the things I did too. Because I mean, when I went to prison, I didn't go to prison by myself. I took a lot of people to prison with me. No one goes to prison alone. I took my family, I took the victims, I took society, I took everybody to prison with me. Damon goes to prison, he takes everybody with him. So I definitely don't want to come off as saying, well, here's the reason why, here's the excuse why, because I own everything I did. I did everything. I got sent to prison. I earned my life sentence. But yeah, you're right. From that event creates everything else. What it did do for sure, that I can tell you, is it destroyed any semblance of a relationship that I could ever have with another human being. Everything was based on sex. It was a physical type deal at that point on. In fact, until I got married 5 years ago, after I got out of prison, after I started working a 12-step program recovery, that's the first real relationship I've ever had in my life. I was 43 years old when I got married, and that's the first real relationship I've ever had in my life. And this is one of the things that I got robbed of at 9 years old, is the ability to have good relationships. I've always felt in a relationship that it was something physical and it was all about me. Now, this is something that, look, when I told my parents about the molestation thing, my mom's one of the most devout Catholic women you've ever met, man. We go to talk to the family priest. We pray about it. She sends me to a counselor. But something inside that little 9-year-old boy goes to a dark place. And that's where the other behaviors start happening with that. The biggest thing that happened, though, John, is I started creating these belief systems. Your belief systems are so important because your belief system tells you how to act, how to behave, how to respond in every situation you're in. And when you have good belief systems, you make good choices. But when you possess a bad belief system, you continuously make bad choices. And eventually your bad belief system will get the best of you because your belief systems, they stay with you for the rest of your life. And a bad belief system usually wins at the end. They're very hard to change, a belief system, very hard to change.
So, man, there's so much to talk about. So we're going to kind of accelerate through some of the stories.
Yeah.
You're addicted at a young age. You like the feel of a buzz at an extraordinarily young age. And you just grab onto that substance throughout your middle school years, high school years, into college. You get away with a bunch of it because you're a star athlete.
Yeah.
You're quarterback in college team on scholarship, age 20. That begins to fizzle out. What happened?
Yeah, man. This is Texas Friday night football, man. This is Friday Night Lights. I grew up under those lights in the state of Texas, man. I was a 3-year starting quarterback for a 5A school. Biggest division we had back then. I was a stud. I was the blue chip kind of guy. I got a scholarship to play football at the University of North Texas, Division I college football. By the time I'm 20, I'm the starter of the team. And, man, my head is this big, man. I thought I had arrived in life. But life is a way of giving us these days I call fork in the roads. Those fork in the roads are the big days in life. And you've been through the fork in the road. Everybody's been through the fork in the roads. You get up and you make a choice that day. You either make the right choice to go the right way or the wrong choice to go the wrong direction. My fork in the road happens on September 21st, 96. We were playing Texas A&M. Beautiful Saturday in College Station that day. I'm 20. I'm driving my team down to the Aggies, but the third play of the game, I go down. It's a career-ending injury. Never play college football again. And when I got to the fork in the road in life and football was gone, my identity was gone too, John. Now, this is it, man. This is why I call this the fork in the road in Damon West life, because my identity was wrapped up into something external. And you can't do that in life, John. You know you can't do that. I mean, you see it happening so much too, especially You see it with young people right now with these phones in their pockets, and their identities come from a place called social media, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, Snapchat. Your identity is who you are on the inside. And at 20 years old, I was lost. And that's when I got into hardcore drugs because my belief system kicked in. My belief system had told me at a younger age it was okay to drink and do drugs. Not a big deal. I mean, you're just having a good time. Well, now I get a hold of some stuff that's really hardcore, cocaine, ecstasy, that kind of thing. But I was a very functional addict, John. I graduate college. I move off to Washington, D.C. I work in the United States Congress. I work for a guy running for president of the United States. And then I work for one of the biggest Wall Street banks in the world, UBS, United Bank of Switzerland. And it was at that job as a stockbroker in 2004 that my life and the lives of all those other innocent people are forever changed. When another stockbroker introduced me to meth one day at work, I was passed out of sleep at work, and he gives me my first hit of meth. Instantly hooked. Instantly hooked, just like that.
So much of your story, and it just hit me. It's so obvious, but sometimes I need another smack across the face to realize what's really going on. So much of your story is about proximity. And the people you are doing life with, if you pay attention to them, will profoundly influence your life from that moment going forward. Sometimes to the benefit of you and others, other times it will completely derail you. So here you are at 24, on top of the world and moving forward. And this one guy introduces you one time to one drug, and that's that.
Yeah, it was like touching a live wire. I tell people all the time, meth is the most evil, most destructive, most addictive drug ever created by man. It's made in a lab, made to get you hooked. I smoked it one time, instantly hooked just like that. And I couldn't give everything away faster for that drug because, John, that's what addicts do. We give things away. An addict gives up their goals to meet their behaviors. That's the definition of addiction. And now, keep in mind that addiction doesn't have to be drugs or alcohol.
An addict gives up their goals to meet their behaviors. Tell me what that means.
Well, what it means is this, that drugs and alcohol are just one form of addiction. Food, money, clothing, shopping, sex, pornography, the internet, whatever. You can be addicted to a lot of things in life. But if you ever find yourself at a place in life where you're giving up your goals, the things you want in life, the things you aspire to be, to meet a behavior that you have because of your addiction, if you're giving up those goals to meet that behavior, you're an addict. Because driven people, focused people, successful people, they'll give up the bad behavior to meet a goal. They'll see the bad behavior and say, oh, that's an impediment. That's not going to get me where I want to go. I'm driven. I'm focused. That's my goal. I need to get back in my lane. But addicts, we don't know what our lane is, man. We just get off and go after whatever makes us feel good.
When did your parents begin to recognize that their baby boy, this Johnny Wonder, man, running around the sidelines and running forward in life, first in Congress, now at this bank, has derailed? When did they begin to recognize the extent of your brokenness?
Tell you this story, man. It's in my book, The Change Agent, my autobiography, The Change Agent. 2005, Hurricane Rita hits, and my parents live in Southeast Texas. I live in Dallas. It destroys my parents' house. My grandmother from Missouri lives with my parents now at that point, and she's like in her late 80s. But my parents' house is destroyed, so my dad drives my grandmother, his mother, from Southeast Texas to Dallas. It's about a 28-hour drive because of the traffic jam. Normally about a 5-hour drive. It takes him 28 hours to get there. Drops off his mother to me. And like, look, man, at this point, I've still got an apartment. I'm hanging on barely. I'm lying to my parents. They think I work for a software company. That's what I told them at the time. I work for a software company. I'm lying to my parents. That's another thing addicts do. We lie a lot. We do whatever we have to do. We manipulate. We do whatever we have to do. And so my dad drives my grandmother up to Dallas because he's like, you got to take care of grandma now. He drives her up there. John, I'm barely hanging on at this point, man. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Uptown Dallas. And in fact, I've lost control of my apartment because the Mexican cartels are running it now. They've taken over my apartment. But I tell them all, look, man, my dad's coming up with my grandmother. And the cartel guys are very serious about family. That's one thing about the Hispanic culture. They're very serious about family. So the cartel guys understood it. We cleaned the apartment up. They're all gone. My dad comes in. So the place looks normal, looks all cleaned up. Drops off my grandmother and a credit card for me to take care of her. John, this is the biggest failure in the history of my life. And I put the story in the book because I wanted people to see exactly what addiction looks like. My grandmother lived in my room of that apartment for the next month. And I brought 3 meals to her all the time. I didn't take care of her well. I didn't bathe her enough. It was a dereliction of duty on my part as her grandson, but I'm an addict living in my addiction. I'm up for days at a time. I can barely take care of myself. And that credit card that my dad gave to me to take care of my grandmother, the cartel guys got that. And now their families got to spend my grandmother's money buying stuff for whatever it was to their family because I have this dope debt going on out there. Man, I'm so far gone at this point, John, and I can't even look my parents in the eyes. My mom comes up to pick up my grandmother, and she looks at this condition my grandmother's in, just like she hasn't been bathed enough. She's not clean. This is my grandmother. This is my blood. And my mom knows that something's terribly wrong, but she can't get it out of me what it is. Because I mean, I'm like, oh, mom, I'm fine. It's been hard taking care of grandma. John, it was my biggest failure in life. And my parents took her back in. She lived several years after that. But not being able to take care of my own grandmother in a time of crisis, that's when my parents knew something was wrong, man. But I lived in Dallas. I was five hours away. So the only thing they could do is kidnap me at that point, which wasn't possible. My mom would always tell me, Damon, why don't you come home? I know something's wrong. Why don't you come home? But there was no way I was going home, John, because my dope dealer was up in Dallas, man. All my dope dealers were in Dallas. I couldn't get away from the meth, man. There wasn't a day that went by for 3 years that I didn't smoke meth. I mean, constantly on a loop. Every single day I had to have this stuff. That's the mind of an addict. Addiction is a 3-part process. Addicts have a thought to use, let's say drink or do drugs, that will become an obsession. They'll obsess over it. And eventually that obsession will become something physical. They'll put in thought, obsession, physical. John, this is why addiction is so prevalent in America, because I think every addict has to have a program recovery. And unless you have a program recovery, you can't deal with your disease of addiction. Spiraling. Yeah, you just spiral. You don't get the thoughts out of your head.
Well, a moment ago when we were talking, you mentioned about the day you were arrested. You said they were there to arrest me, but they also saved me.
Yeah, they
I don't
rescued me,
think
man.
anybody had a clue what you were talking about then. I think everybody is completely in the loop what you're talking about now.
Yeah.
You're spiraling completely out of control. You are derelict in your responsibility to your own life, but also to your grandmother's life, to your family responsibilities, to the gifts you've received. And this comes to a head 2008.
Yeah, July 30th, 2008. And in that interim, I lose that apartment. I'm homeless at one point. I live on the streets, and I slept on park benches. I slept in cars. I know what that's like. And that's when I became a criminal at that point. And it started with petty crimes, shoplifting, breaking into cars, breaking into storage units. Then eventually I started breaking into people's houses. And this is a serious crime, John. This is what I talk about. And this is when I broke into people's homes, I didn't just steal their property, I stole their sense of security. And these burglaries went on for 2 to 3 years. They call them the Uptown Burglaries for the Uptown neighborhood of Dallas. They called me the Uptown Burglar, although they didn't know exactly who I was, the ringleader of the whole thing. But on July 30th, 2008, the Uptown Burglaries come to an end because they got their man. They finally got the Uptown Burglar. And like we said at the beginning, they didn't just arrest me that day. They rescued me that day. They saved my life that day. The angels in my story, John, don't have wings. They have assault rifles and shields and helmets. Sometimes the angels in your life don't look like angels when they come for you, because the angels can come in the form of a bankruptcy. It can be a failed marriage. It can be somebody in your family dying. It can be something happened to one of your children, one of your pets. But this adversity that comes in life is usually ushering in something else, but we have to be willing to see that on the other side of the pain, there's something greater for us out there.
Dude, you're saying all the right words now. You weren't living them back then. May 18th, 2009. Am I giving the dates about right? You hear something in court that I can't even imagine hearing. Like you kind of went in thinking, when do I get out of here so I get my next buzz?
Yeah.
And you're going to be reminded real shortly that it's going to be a long time. Tell us what happened, and then tell us what it felt like to hear that news.
Yeah, the trial lasted for 6 days, man. 6 days is a long trial for crimes where no one got physically hurt. This is not a physical crime. This is not a crime.
Tell me why was that? I'm always curious. 6 days for this kind of case seems like extraordinarily dramatic.
So much evidence, man. There was so much evidence. I mean, first of all, one of the main rules in crime is that everybody talks. Everybody talks, John. So, I mean, every one of my co-conspirators is testifying against me. But the biggest person that testified against me in that trial is Damon West on these jailhouse recordings. Criminals are stupid, John. We're all stupid. So when I'm in Dallas County Jail, my bond is set at $1.4 million. It's the biggest bond in Dallas County at the time. Dude. There's 9,000 people in Dallas County Jail, John. It's like a city inside there. It's 9,000. It's one of the biggest jails in America. 9,000 people, no one else, not murderers, child molesters, or rapists have a bond that high. And my crimes are nonviolent property crimes. No one was ever hurt. And the reason why no one was ever home is because we made sure that no one's ever home, John. We never went to a house when someone was there, right? But this trial lasted for 6 days because everybody testified against me. The jailhouse recordings take up a lot of time. And I'm on the phone telling people from county jail, calling other people from the dope world. You owe me money for this job we did, man. Bring that money up here and help me make this bond. It's 1.4 million. Well, every time the cops hear one of these calls, they're going and picking up the people on the other end. I'm like, hey, you're under arrest. We got you for this crime because Damon West told us on the jailhouse call. That person, in order for them to get out of trouble, they're going to testify against me. I brought more pain onto me in that trial than anybody else, man. So I'm not mad about anybody for testifying against me. The trial lasted.
How long did they deliberate?
10 minutes.
10
minutes.
I want you to like put a bow on that for a moment. Like a 10-minute deliberation, that's not enough time to walk into the room and then walk back. Like this was an immediate decision by the jurors.
Immediate. The only thing that stopped it from being 5 minutes is the jury sent a note into the judge from the jury room that asked the judge, can we give him life without parole? In which the judge told him, no, you can give him life, but not life without parole.
Right.
So that's what they gave me, John. They gave me life. 65 years was my sentence. 65 years, or as they say in prison slang, 6 dimes and a nickel. 65 years is a life sentence in the state of Texas. Texas stops calculating time on the timesheet in prison at 60 years. 60 years is the lifespan of a human being that has to be 17 years old to go to prison first. 77 years is the lifespan of a human being. So 60 is life. 65 is life. It's all life at that point.
So to your right, as you're looking at me, to my left, I have a big old picture of the prodigal son coming home to his dad.
Yeah.
And it's this great painting of this broken, criminal, poor, addicted boy kneeling down in front of his dad. And it's a reminder of the kind of love that God has for us and the kind of love dads should have for their sons, moms should have for their kids, but none do. Not perfectly, purely grace-filled. They just can't. But about as close as I've heard coming to that is what happened after you were sentenced to a lifetime in prison for the crimes you did commit. And now you are owning when you met your mom and dad for that 5-minute conversation afterwards. What happened?
That's why my mom gives me the ultimatum. She's telling me the first call I ever made from county jail to my parents, my mom was reminding me, she goes right to her faith, John. I mean, it's a devout Catholic woman. She's got this huge devotion to the Blessed Mother. And so she's reminding me of this prayer plaque that she had on my wall as a kid of footprints in the sand. And she was reminding me of the times that I saw one set of footprints that was Jesus carrying me. Right after the trial was over, she reminds me of that footprints in the sand again. She's telling me, get on Christ's back. I don't want to lose my son. And she's reminding me that I can't come back as someone they don't recognize. No gangs, no tattoos. Come back as the man we raised or don't come back at all. And years later, very recently, John, I asked my mom, where did that come from?
Agreed.
And she said, the Holy Spirit. She said, Damon, I'm a nurse. I see everything through the eyes of a nurse. What I see after that trial is my son is on the gurney bleeding out and dying. And that's when you go into triage. And triage, she said, is when you throw everything at the problem. You try because you have nothing to lose at that point. You try everything in triage. And she said, that's what came to me from the Holy Spirit, was to tell you that. Draw that line in the sand, tell you can't come home again if that's what you do. I heard this question posed one time by James Clear. James Clear said this question: if someone took control of your life tomorrow, what's the first thing they would change? It's a deep question. It requires a lot of thought too. But it piqued my curiosity, John, because I have been in a situation before where someone did take control of my life. It was the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, right? I've made so many poor choices at this point in my life that I've given up control of my life to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice with a 65-year sentence to go live on a supermax prison. So I understand James Clear's question pretty clearly. I did give up control of my life. I knew that something had to change, John. I knew that something was me, but I just didn't know how to change. I didn't know how I was going to change at that point.
So where you are, most of us listening to my voice and yours are not in a max prison, whether it's in Colorado, Texas, or Missouri, or anywhere else. Most of us, God willing, aren't addicted to meth right now, but we all have our addictions, our struggles, our challenges.
Sure.
And the desire to change. Most of us know there's a better life right around the corner, but it's around the corner. Like I don't know how to get there. That's a long way to go. And I'm watching Netflix, by the way. Like, so how do you encourage those of us feeling like we're locked up right now to begin stepping forward into the freedom ahead?
I think you got to give up the idea of control because you don't have control over most things in life. Before I answer this question, I want to tell you, everybody listening to this, that the change that happened in my life to go from where I was to where I am today, there's a spiritual awakening that happened in there. For you to make big changes in your life, for you to become the best version of you, there's a spiritual component to that. And you have to tap into the spiritual component. Because I don't think, John, that human beings are capable of making the kind of changes I made on their own. I just don't think human beings can do that. I think there has to be a spiritual component. And when you find that spiritual component, you can turn over your life and your will, your thoughts and your actions to your higher power. Mine's Christ. Yours is Christ. We're both Catholic, right? So that's the higher power aspect. I got into a 12-step program recovery in prison. And that's when I started getting the answers for how to turn this around. I also started getting the answers for living as an addict, living a normal life. I got into a 12-step program recovery. One of the first things I learned how to do, John, is I learned how to pray. Addiction is the most selfish thing in the world. To become a person that lives in recovery, you have to become selfless. Addiction is selfish. Recovery is selfless. My prayer is the same prayer. I pray the same prayer every single day. I started praying in 2011 when I got in that 12-step program. Every morning I get up and I ask Christ for two things, John. I said, hey, God, put in front of me what you need me to do today for you, and let me recognize that when I see that, because I don't want to miss whatever that thing is. Amen. Now I'm useful again. Now I've turned it around, and I'm that vessel that I talked about being earlier. Now, when I was working that program recovery, I live in a world called a supermax prison. I've given up control of my life. Like we talked about the James Clear question. I've given up control of my life. I finally learned what it is to give up control because most of the decisions in my life are already made for me living inside of a prison. Right. That's a tough thing to do when you've gone through a life of making decisions. Even if you made poor decisions, you were still making decisions, but the keys have been taken away from me now. I don't even control my own life. I'm at a recovery meeting one morning. Every Wednesday morning, we meet in the Chapel of Hope. And the recovery group is called the Spiritual Awakening of Sober Offenders.
And Damon, this is in prison still?
This is in prison. This is in prison. Every Wednesday morning in prison, we go to these meetings at the chapel. And the guy that brings the meeting from the free world, I'll call him Ray. I'll protect his anonymity because this program's built on anonymity. So Ray says, hey, Damon, today we're going to diagram the serenity prayer. And so he has a chalkboard behind him, John. He draws a line from one side of the chalkboard to the other. And he said, that line represents God's line. He says the first part of the prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. He said the things you cannot change are on God's line, Damon. And every time you touch something on God's line, you've hurt yourself and you've hurt other people because you're not God. And God doesn't need your help doing his job. He said, stay off of God's line because you got your own line. Then he turns around and he erases a little inch out of God's line. And I'm holding my fingers an inch apart for the listeners here. He holds his fingers up an inch apart that day in the chapel for all the inmates to see. And he said, if God's line's infinitely long, that's your line, 1 inch. He said that little 1 inch line was humility because he said humility is being right-sized. And when we are right-sized, we can be useful to other people. He said the second part of the prayer, the courage to change the things I can. He said the things you can change are on your little 1 inch line. And there's 4 things you get to change in your life every day. These are the 4 things you have control over. The 4 things God gives you to work on every day in your life. What you think, what you say, what you feel, and what you do. What you think, what you say, what you feel, and what you do. He said if it's not one of those 4 things, you have no control over it. He said, Damon, what I'm telling you is the world goes on around you. You cannot control the world around you, but you can control the world inside you. He said the last part of the prayer was the most important part of the prayer, the wisdom to know the difference between that great big line and your little 1 inch line. I can't tell you how many times a day, John, I go up to decisions all the time. Happened today already. I go up to the decision. I ask myself, Damon, is that on your line? And if it's not, I walk away.
How do you know? How do you know what I mean? Because it all feels like our line, man. You got a child, you got a marriage.
I got a little stepdaughter. I got a little stepdaughter that's 13.
It's all your line. It feels like it's all your line. So how do you know when it's God's line versus yours? How do you discern the wisdom to know the difference?
So there's 4 spiritual principles that I really plug every decision into. And these are the 4 spiritual principles I got from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. These 4 spiritual principles are unselfish, honest, pure, and loving. Unselfish, honest, pure, and loving. If the choices I want to make come from those four places, then it's okay for me to do. But if it doesn't come from one of those four spiritual principles, then it comes from another place, a place that I need to avoid. That place is selfish, self-seeking, self-want, self-desires, there's self-delusion. All the self-words are over there on the other side of those four spiritual principles. Now, John, am I perfect at hearing this? Absolutely not, man. I'm a human being. I'm fallible. I'm not infallible. I make mistakes all the time. I stumble, I fall, I get back up. But I'm not working for spiritual perfection. I'm just working for spiritual progress, you know? So that's my life, man. Do I make the right choice and the right call all the time and what's on my mind? Absolutely not. But I try to. And when I stumble, I fall, I get back up. And I try not to create a resentment against myself. Resentments are dangerous, John. Once we start creating resentments, man, resentments are like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. I mean, it's bad. Resentments, man, the stuff you resent in life, the chance is really good that the person, the place, the group, whatever you resent, doesn't even know you resent them. So it doesn't bother them at all. And if they found out, they probably wouldn't even care. But you care. This poison that sits inside of you eats you alive from the inside out. And here's one of the things I learned about resentments. Our resentments, I think, are created when every time we have a resentment against a person, a group, an institution, whatever, it's because it touches one of three core instincts that we have as human beings. There is a social instinct, the instinct to want to be a part of society, belong, right? Because I think human beings at the core want to belong, want to be loved. Those are two things we want. So there's a social instinct that our resentment can touch. There is a security instinct that our resentment can touch. Security instinct. You want to have a good job. You want to be able to make money. You want to be able to provide for your family. These are things you want out of life. And then there's a sex instinct that we have. Now, I'm not talking about sex being a promiscuous thing, the stuff that the 9-year-old Damon West was into. I'm talking about the sex instinct, like you want to find a partner in life. You want to have a family. These are the things that deal with relationships in life with another person. Social, security, and sex. The things that bother us in life touch one or all three of these things, John. Now, I'll show you how this works. When I was in prison, I had a huge resentment against the judge in my trial, a guy named Judge Mike Snipes. Now, Judge Mike Snipes, man, I used to hang out with this guy. We used to party together. This is before he was a criminal district court judge, and I was a criminal defendant in his courtroom, right? When I walked into this courtroom, I thought, man, this is Snipes. This is great. This is my, I know Snipes. Wrong, man. This guy handled me rough. In fact, he was very biased against me. And it didn't matter. I was a criminal defendant, and I was a bad defendant. I was a bad guy. I did everything that I was accused of. But I always felt like Snipes did me wrong. And so I had this resentment against Snipes. I've carried it with me through prison. So one day, Ray, from the guy that brings the meeting into the prison, the guy from the free world, I'm telling Ray about my resentment of Snipes. He goes, man, we got to get rid of this resentment. He said, you're going to lose your recovery. You're going to get high again if you hold on to this resentment. Because that's the thing, John. These resentments hold us back, and they give us an excuse to put in the chemicals to change the way we feel, I can just feel better if I do that. I won't have this resentment eat me away. So he said, what we do in a personal inventory is we got to plug this resentment in to all three of those basic instincts in life that a resentment can touch. So he draws 3 lines on the board, 3 columns, one social, one security, one is sex. And he puts Judge Mike Snipes over here on the left-hand side. So he says, your resentment is Snipes. Does it affect your social instinct? Yeah, I'm an ex-con, man. Nobody wants to be around ex-cons. I'm not going to be able to fit into society again. He said, well, let's put a check mark there. He said, does your resentment against Snipes, does it touch your security instinct? Yeah, I'm an ex-con, John. What kind of jobs am I going to get as an ex-con? Ex-cons have a hard time out there in the world. He said, well, put a check there too. Does it affect your sex instinct? Yes. I live in a men's prison, man. There is no more of that. And when I get out of prison, who wants to be with an ex-con, right? What are my chances then to find love? He said, well, put a check there, man. No wonder why you got such a strong resentment, man. This resentment against Snipes touches all 3 instincts, man. That's why it's so strong. He said, but there's a 4th column I forgot to show you. So he draws a line for a 4th column. And in that column, he writes the words, what role do I play? He said, so in recovery, we're always trying to find what role we play in our problems. Because he said there's an axiom, whenever I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. Whenever I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. He said, so what we got to do is we always got to find the role we play in our problems, because if we can find that, that's the one thing we can fix. That's the one thing we can change. That's the one thing we can control. So he gave me the chalk. He said, tell me the role you played in your resentment. And man, this was a moment for me. I'm realizing that, wait a second, I was a criminal defendant. I committed crimes against people. I broke into people's homes. I stole people's sense of security. I broke the social contract. I did all these things. And one day I walk in a criminal district court 7 and Judge Snipes is there doing his job. I put myself in Snipes' courtroom. I did all the things that put me in there. It wasn't Snipes. It was me the whole time. I was the problem. I wiped my resentment away against Snipes that day. The reason why I'm going into all these details of how this program recovery works, John, is because that's the way I finally freed myself. When I walked out of prison on November 16th, 2015, 7 years, 3 months, and 18 days after the arrest by the SWAT team, when I walked out of prison on November 16th, 2015, that was a trifecta of freedom for me, because long before I'd already freed myself mentally and I already freed myself spiritually. Physically, I walked out of prison that day and I was a fully free man. But I was free long before that, John, just not physically free.
Dude, listen, we only have an hour on these shows, and I could spend one of the hours just talking about that one little story. There's so much to unpack there, so much resentment that you had to let go of, so much we carry forward, and how do we let go of it?
Yeah.
But man, I want to get to a little bit of resolution on what you're doing in your life today. So we got to at some point break you out, dude. We got to push back bars and let you sneak out. Your mother was there the day you got out, 7 years, 3 months, X amount of days after you stepped in. She gave you 3 things, but the thing I want you to tell our community about, because I have 7 of them at home, a little bracelet, a little silver bracelet made with fishing hooks.
Yeah.
Why would your mother give you that?
When I was in prison, I went to these retreats these Catholic guys would bring in. And all those guys wore those bracelets. And when I was in prison, I told my mom, when I get out of prison, when I find these guys from this community, those are the guys going to be my brothers now. And so when I got out of prison that day, my mom puts one of these bracelets on my wrist in the car on the drive home from prison. She puts a bracelet on my wrist. She said, Damon, all your brothers and sisters in Christ that wear these bracelets, that's how they identify themselves within the community. And she said, I signed you up for an ACTS retreat. That's called ACTS, Adoration, Community, Theology, and Service. That was the men for that group. She said, I set you up for an ACTS retreat. You'll be going in January, which is 2 months from that day. You'll be going January 14th to your first ACTS retreat in the free world. She said, go find your friends. And man, one of the best.
By the way, dude, stop. That's my favorite sentence I've ever heard you say from your mom. Go find your friends.
Go find your friends, man. Go find your friends.
Beautiful sentence.
Yeah, go find your friends. And so I did, man. I went to that ACTS retreat and it was great, man. These men, they were servant leaders. They shared with me their successes in life, but more importantly, they shared with me their failures, so I didn't have to fail where they failed. Men need to be around other strong men, and that was my first encounter in the free world, outside of my father, of being around other good men, to be around me, to be mentors to me. And there were other mentors along the way that helped me shape who I was. Yes. Dabo Sweeney was one of those. I met Dabo at a coaches award show in Houston. 8 coaches in the room, 7 say no. Dabo says yes. This is the guy that just beat Alabama 2 nights before. Dabo brings me to speak to Clemson. After that, he calls every coach in America. I go speak to every team in America. Then he calls John Gordon. John Gordon calls me up out of the blue. John says, Damon, write a book with me. We'll call it The Coffee Bean. That book comes out in 2019, right before the world becomes a pot of boiling water. And in 2020, 2021, the world was searching for the right message to get them through. And so many people landed on the Coffee Bean guy, Damon West. And man, my life, John, went from just this flat plane to this vertical rise, and it hadn't stopped yet. I'm on the road now, John. I'm on the road 20, 25 days a month speaking. It's been this way for 3 years. I've caught momentum, and when you catch momentum in life, you've got to ride that wave until you're ready to get off, or momentum kicks you off. And my family and I, we sit back and assess it all the time. Is this still the path we're going on? Great. If it is, we're going to keep going. John also told me about this thing called rhythm over balance. He said, you'll never find balance in the life you have. I've never found balance in my life as a speaker, but you can find some rhythm. Rhythm is this: whatever you're doing, wherever you're at, you're focused on being there. And if that's on the road speaking, then you're there because you want to bring the message. You want to impact as many people as possible. But when you're off the road, you're back at home for a few days. You're very much focused there. You put your phone away. You're very present with your family. Find this rhythm and bounce back and forth from the road to your house, from the road to your house. So I've found a lot of rhythm in life, but I've never done any of this on my own, John. I've had a lot of help along the way, a lot of good mentors that have helped me out on the way. And we share some of those same mentors. And that's why it was so good to come talk to you today, brother.
Well, I interviewed John Gordon back in 2019 regarding the coffee bean, and never imagined in my wildest life that I would interview his partner in crime who helped write that book and the man who
Yeah,
is the epicenter of that book. It's an amazing story. It's an amazing story. And I had no idea how amazing the man is at the core of it. I love you, man. I love your heart. And yet I also know that hearts, once they're broken, it can feel difficult to feel lovable. When you made every mistake, when you committed those crimes, when you went away for 7.5 years, did you feel as if you had something ultimately to give to someone else as a life partner that you would be
man,
worthy of being
that's a
worthy
good question,
of
John.
love?
I laid in, it's a real good question. I used to lay in my bunk and I thought, and I'm working my program recovery, and I've got a lot of faith in Christ. I mean, Christ is carrying me around on that prison, man. I'm riding passenger of this car now. I'm just riding shotgun. He's driving. But I still have this worry, this fear, this nagging fear that I'll never find someone that'll love me. And if I find someone that's going to love me, their family's not going to love me. Who's going to love this guy? John, I'm on parole until the year 2073 in Texas, right? I'm on parole the rest. I got 49 more years from the date of this recording to be on parole. I'm 49 years old. I'm halfway there, right? But I've got 49 more years left on parole in the state of Texas. This is, and at the time I'm in prison, I still haven't even made it out. I'm not even on parole yet. I'm like, man, who wants to be with this guy? I heard this Yiddish saying one time, the Yiddish proverb, man plans while God laughs. Man, let me tell you something. Everything in life that I've been afraid of, that I feared, God had a bigger plan than I would, even my fears could even imagine. I couldn't have scripted the life that I have today. I got married May 18th, 2019. I got married to my wife named Kendall. I became a husband and I became a stepfather to her daughter, Clara. And it's funny, May 18th was a very intentional day. May 18th, 2009 was the day I was sentenced to life in prison. So 10 years to the day, or as Kendall says, you went from one life sentence to another. Much better cellmate situation this time, though. Man, this is a lot more fun.
No offense, Carlos. I'm sure
no offense, Carlos, man. You're a good guy, but not this good. But yeah, man, life is incredible. But I had all those fears, John. And what I want to tell your audience today is like, man, look, I get it. It's okay to have fears, but you can't let your fears consume you because most of your fears aren't real. In fact, that's one of the things Muhammad said. He thought fear in general wasn't real. He said danger is real. Danger is a very real thing. You have to be conscious of danger. You have to be aware of danger. You have to respect danger. But fears are mostly in our head. They're a feeling we get in the situation we're in. Fears aren't real. Danger is real. But I would say, look, to people out there, you may think that you're not worthy. You may think that there's something you've done that just can't be overcome. But again, like the old Yiddish proverb, man plans and God laughs. God's got a bigger plan for us out there. But that's another reason to attach to a spiritual component, because if you do, you'll believe that there's a bigger plan out there for you too.
We have 7 questions that tether all of our guests together. They're called the Live Inspired 7. They're quick fire questions and answers. So we'll get ready to roll into that in a moment.
One more thing I want to say about John Gordon. So we talked about John. This man was incredible. And I finally got to ask him the question one day about, so I'm on the phone with John. We're doing the coffee bean. We don't even meet in person until after it gets published. Like this book becomes a worldwide book, gets a global publishing deal attached to it. 3 months later, we meet for the first time. We've been talking for 15 months on the phone before we finally met. The book came out. We did a book deal, everything. So I finally get to ask John, did anybody from your inner circle ever pull you aside at any point and say, John, what are you doing, man? This guy just got out of prison. He's an unknown quantity. No one knows anything about him. All we know is what we've read, and it's terrible. Why are you attaching your whole platform to this guy?
Right.
So I asked him the question, and here was his answer.
By the way, before you give it, that is a great question, one I've never considered. There is no guarantee that you're going to become the next Jean Valjean. There's a high likelihood you're going to return to jail doing something horrible and bring John in with you.
There's a very high likelihood. Most ex-cons that have come before me have burned the bridge to the ground, right? That's what I was up against.
It's a good question.
So I asked John, why did you do it? He said, Damon, when Dabo told me about the coffee bean in his office that day, I could immediately, he said, he gets these things because he calls downloads. They come from God. He said, I got this download, and it was the cover of the book, and your name was on the cover. God told me, call Damon, write this book with him, and he sent me the cover of the book, and your name was on it. So he said, I just listen to what God says. I don't listen to what other people say. How many people you think told John? Probably a lot of people.
That's
This is
right.
crazy, John. But this is another thing about listening to God, man. There's a little old lady in prison. There was a volunteer chaplain lady. She's one of the Catholic ladies that came in, the volunteers. Her name was Ms. D. And she told me something very wise one day, John. She said, if you're going to pray, don't worry. But if you're going to worry, don't pray. She said, you can't do both. You can't do God's job and your job too. So if you're
Damon,
going to,
learn more about Misty and the Coffee Bean and John Gordon and all things you, man. What's the best place to learn more about your work?
DamonWest.org, DamonWest.org. That's where people find me for speaking engagements, everything about it. There's an email in there. You can shoot me questions, whatever you want. I love hearing from people, John.
All right, man, let's roll. Roll up your sleeves and get your shoes on because we're gonna run right now.
Let's
But
do it, brother.
what's they're called the Live Inspired Seven. Gordon has walked through this, so you know it's a safe and a well-traveled path. But what's been the most impactful book you've ever read? That's question number one.
There's two different ones. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And I've got it right here, The Count of Monte Cristo. So great books.
Super appropriate, man, for your life and the
Yeah.
journey forward. What's one positive characteristic or one trait you possessed as a little guy growing up before abuse, before addiction, before life took you one way that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
I was a better listener back then than I was in the rest of my life. Man, listening is a superpower. And sometimes we get to a place in life where we feel like, we can finish someone's sentence or we know the answer. I've got to remind myself to be that better listener from back in the day.
If your home caught fire and your step baby is out, your wife is out, and the animals you may have, they're all out, and you have an opportunity of running in and grabbing one item, what's that one physical thing you'd come racing back outside with?
It had to be my Bible from prison, because the Bible from prison is the only book you can keep with you no matter what. I got sent to solitary. They can't take your Bible from you. Everything was written inside that Bible, inside that prison. So it would be the Bible from prison. I would have to grab it. It's in my nightstand drawer.
Man, so like 3B is there something in your Bible that when you bump into it, you read it, you see it underlined, it still blows you away? Sometimes we write things that are so profound we don't even understand it. And then a dozen years later, we look back and we're like, gosh, now I understand what I wrote down or underlined.
Yeah, Matthew 25:36. When I was in prison, you visited me. And I wrote in the margins that when I get out, I have to visit people in prison. Every month, somewhere in America, I voluntarily walk through a prison. I go into speaking to engagements all over the country. I'll call prison directors up, say, hey, this is Damon West. They all know who I am now. They all want me inside their prison. Hey, I'll be swinging through your state. I've got this window open from this state to this state. Can I come in and speak to your inmates? And I mean, I've even had prison directors go, man, yeah, you can, but how much is it going to cost me? I'm like, nothing's not going to cost you a thing. Well, then why are you doing it? And my answer is simple, man. That's how I stay sober. So I wrote my margins in prison that if I ever get out, I'm going to come back in. And that's what I did. Matthew 25:36.
If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous day outside of prison and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like having seated right next to you?
Man, it'd probably be my dad. I'd probably like pull my dad aside. And one of the, before my dad died last summer, he said, he told me to take care of my mom. And I was like, Dad, I got this. And, John, when we're recording this right now, is December 17th. December 23rd, she'll move into the house that I built her on my property. So she's 1 week away from moving into the house that I built her. So she's not going to be alone anymore. And I got her. So I'd like to sit down and talk to my dad and tell him about it. Just talk about life.
The boy who received a credit card to just take care of grandma. This is not hard, man. Could not. And now that same boy became a man who's bringing mom onto his property to live well into her twilight years. That is such a story.
Yeah, man.
That is such redemption, man.
Yeah, I can't, John, I can't believe this is my life, brother. I tell my wife that probably every day, man. Most of the time it's from the road, but I just can't believe this is my life, that I'm the vessel for it. And I'll tell you, there was a conversation when I walked out of prison that day, November 16, 2015. This is a conversation I saved for faith-based audiences, but your podcast is great for this. It's just like you see in the movies, John. They walk you to the front gate. You're dressed out in your free world clothes. You've got your few possessions in your hands. The guard walks you to the front. This big gate opens up, and now you can step on the other side of this gate. You've been looking at it for all these years. The big gate opens. You step on the other side. and the big gate closes behind you. You're locked out of prison. You're in the free world again. And man, the ground felt a little different. The sky was a little bluer. The grass was a little greener. The air was lighter. These are tricks of the mind that are going on. And I see my parents in the parking lot, and I take off running for them. And there's a voice in my head that says, "Stop, Damon." So I shut it down. I know what the voice is. It's Christ talking to me, right? It says, "Turn around." So I turn back around. The guard's looking at me like, "What are you looking at me for, man? Go. You were going the right way." But I'm looking back at the guard. I'm looking at the prison. I'm looking at the guard tower, the fence, the barbed wire. And this is what Christ tells me that day. "You're going to work for me now, Damon." He said, "Man, I put you through all this for a reason. You already know this. We've been training for this. You're going to work for me now." And he said, "I'm going to give you one of the most amazing life stories ever possible, because that's how I show that I'm real. But this is always going to be about me. And the minute it becomes about you, the minute it becomes Damon's show and not God's show, you're coming back to prison. This is where you're going to come back to. You're just a vessel, Damon, and I can find another vessel. So let's go to work." That was the last conversation on the way out. I mean, I still listen to Christ's prayer and meditation part, but that's what he told me on the way out. You're going to work for me, but you're just a vessel. Don't ever forget that. That's why I got to show up for that prayer every day, John. I'm afraid that if I don't show up for that prayer, you know what God's going to say? "Man, I got the wrong guy out. I'll go get someone else out. I'll put you back in. You can take their spot." I show up every day, John.
You could go back in time right before the Aggies game begins and whisper some wisdom to a 20-year-old quarterback, starting quarterback for North Texas. What would you tell yourself before that game?
Oh, man. I would tell myself that the pain that you're going to feel is temporary unless you do something to make it last longer. You can get past this pain you're about to feel a lot faster. But if you deaden this pain with chemicals and you won't deal with the pain immediately, this is going to be one of the longest injuries you ever recover from. That injury, John, was something that could have been dealt with in so many different ways, a lot better. I think God puts us on a path like that for a reason, but pain demands to be felt. But once you feel your pain, you got to get to the other side of that pain, brother.
Pain demands to be felt.
Demands it, man.
Why don't we all leave the podcast, go to a tattoo parlor, get our first tattoo, and have that be the words on it? Pain demands to be felt. That is good.
Let me call my mom and ask her if I can get a tattoo now.
She's living on your property. She's got no say in your life anymore. We're going to hold hands together while we have that tattoo put on our chest.
I love it. I'll come see you in St. Louis, man. I'm in St. Louis every now and then speaking. I got to come see you, grab a cup of coffee with you, man.
I look forward to it. But before you do, I got one final question for you. It's question number 7 from the Live Inspired podcast. Damon West, it has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like your one sentence to read?
Damon West, servant leader. That's it, man. If I can get that on the tombstone, that's perfect.
An addict, alcoholic, drug user, criminal, servant, leader, husband,
Servant. Yeah.
Christian, the visitor of those in prison, man. There's so many job titles, and the one you want is just servant leader. And I'm so grateful that you made every mistake in the world under the sun, that you eventually surrendered to something bigger than yourself, that it has been redeemed, and that you have too. It's one of the more beautiful stories I know. And today, what you helped us do is to recognize we don't have to live in that toilet anymore, man. We don't have to live on that guy's pocket anymore. We have freedom indeed for those who choose it. And you gave us some clarity around how we can take the next right steps forward.
Thanks, brother. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience today and share that message, man. It's just, these things, you don't ever have any kind of idea where it's going to go. And it was just one of the most incredible hours I've ever spent, man. So thank you for that, John.
I hope the next one gets better. My friends, that is the great Damon West, author, speaker, husband, friend.
Vessel.
John O'Leary. He's a vessel for hope, and so are you. This is your day. What a gift it is. Live inspired. My friends, are you fired up now to become a coffee bean? That's right. You could be a carrot. You could become an egg. Those are popular. They're not productive, but they're popular. Or you can change the environment that you are dropped into. Be a coffee bean. What a gift. What a challenge. What an invitation from our friend Damon West. In thinking through Damon's story, it's so much about proximity, isn't it? How the people you're next to in life have the opportunity of profoundly influencing your life, and you the opportunity of influencing theirs as well. Sometimes to the benefit of yourself and others, and other times to the opportunity of completely derailing your life. Who you hang with, who you party with, who you do life with, who you listen to will influence your life. It's one of the reasons we're so grateful you pay attention to our signal here at the Live Inspired channel. It's also an opportunity for you to tell the ladies and gentlemen you work with, worship with, work out with, do life with, that in a world of negativity and cynicism, there is a voice they can listen to if they choose for good. We bring these voices their way week after week on the Live Inspired podcast. My friends, join us in spreading and sharing this good news. If you enjoyed today's episode, you would also love my conversation with another man, a beacon of light and inspiration and positivity. His name is John Gordon. John Gordon is a buddy of mine. He's a leadership expert. He's a podcast host. He's the best-selling author of 26 books. Gordon, that's just showing off, man. 26 best-selling books, including The Energy Bus. During that episode, you will learn practical tools and actionable strategies to create more success and enjoy the ride of your life. You can listen to the John Gordon on Live Inspired podcast way back at episode 13. People, these were the good old days, episode 1-3, or by letting your fingers do the walking. Cruise with me right now online. Join me on our platform at johnolearyinspires.com/podcast. I will have a link on that John Gordon conversation on the show notes of today's episode. My friends, I want to thank you for being on the Energy Bus with us. I want to thank you for tuning into episodes like this one. I want to thank you for telling your friends that they ought to be listening to episodes like this one. And more than all of that, I want to thank you for championing this kind of movement in your own life, for believing like I do that the foundation is firm, the headwind we face is real, but God is still God and the best is yet to come. This is good news. It is worth sharing. It's worth modeling. Keep moving forward. Know that your life matters. The best is yet to come. So for this time and until next time, my name is John O'Leary. Today is your day. What a gift it is. Live inspired.